The club owner smirked as he blocked the door. "No Colorads perform here," he spat at Billie Holiday. But he didn't know her friend was watching. One phone call, 5 minutes, and Bumpy Johnson would own everything that racist fool held dear. And fire him before Billie's first song even ended. The year was 1948, and Billie Holiday was at the height of her powers. Her voice had graced the finest stages in America, and her name alone could fill any venue in New York City. On this particular autumn evening, the air crisp with the promise of winter, Billie's car pulled up to one of Manhattan's most exclusive nightclubs, the Ebony Room, where she was scheduled to perform. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, her silk gown shimmering under the streetlights, her trademark gardenia pinned perfectly in her hair. This wasn't just any performance. The Ebony Room had specifically requested her, offering top dollar for a 3-night engagement. Her manager had negotiated the contract weeks ago, and everything had been confirmed in writing. The club itself was a monument to excess and elegance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through the windows, and the sound of a house band warming up drifted into the street. Well-dressed patrons lined up at the velvet ropes, eager to get inside. This was the kind of place where Manhattan's elite came. To see and be seen, where champagne flowed freely and the music was supposed to be the finest in the city. Billie walked toward the entrance with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world. Her musicians followed behind, carrying instrument cases and sheet music. They had performed together countless times, and tonight was supposed to be special. The Ebony Room represented a certain level of prestige, even for an artist of Billie's stature. But as she approached the door, something felt wrong. The club's owner, a stocky man named Vincent Rossi, stood blocking the entrance. His arms were crossed, and his expression carried a smugness that made Billie's stomach tighten. She had seen that look before, in 100 different cities, on 100 different faces. It was the look of a man who believed he held all the power. Billie paused, just feet from the entrance. The crowd around them began to notice the confrontation brewing. Conversations hushed. People turned to watch. And Vincent Rossi, with all the confidence of someone who thought himself untouchable, prepared to make the biggest mistake of his life. Vincent Rossi didn't even have the decency to pull her aside. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't allow Colorads to perform here," he announced, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't care how famous you think you are. Find somewhere else to sing." The words hit like a slap. Billie stood frozen for a moment, her hand still clutching her small beaded purse. Around them, the crowd's reactions split down the middle. Some gasped in shock and discomfort, their faces reddening. Others nodded in quiet agreement, as if Rossi had simply stated an obvious fact. "There must be some mistake," Billie said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I have a contract. Your club booked me weeks ago." Rossi shrugged, utterly unbothered. "That was before I knew what you were. My clientele doesn't want to hear music from your kind. We have standards here." He gestured broadly at the gleaming facade of the Ebony Room, as if the building itself justified his bigotry. Behind Billie, her musicians stood in stunned silence. One of them, her piano player, stepped forward. "You can't do this. We have documentation. Signed agreements. I can do whatever I want." Rossi interrupted, his voice rising. "This is my club. I own this place, and I'm telling you all to leave before I have you removed." Billie felt the familiar weight of discrimination settling over her shoulders. This wasn't the first time she had been turned away, insulted, diminished. In the segregated South, it happened constantly. But here, in New York City, at a club that had sought her out and begged for her talent, it stung in a different way. She could have argued. She could have caused a scene. But Billie Holiday had learned long ago that dignity was sometimes the only weapon available to people who looked like her. So she simply nodded, her face an elegant mask that revealed nothing of the pain underneath. "Come on," she said quietly to her musicians. "We're leaving." As she turned to go, Rossi called after her, his voice mocking. "Tell your people to stick to Harlem where they belong." Laughter rippled through part of the crowd. But not everyone was laughing. In the back of the gathering, a well-dressed man, in his 30s, watched the entire exchange with growing fury. He didn't say a word. He simply reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a slim address book, and walked quickly toward the nearest payphone. He had a call to make. And Vincent Rossi's night was about to take a very different turn. The man at the payphone was making a call to someone the entire underworld knew and feared. Ellsworth Raymond, Bumpy Johnson, the undisputed king of Harlem. By 1948, Bumpy Johnson had built an empire that stretched across every corner of Black New York. He controlled the numbers rackets, the protection services, and had his fingers in dozens of legitimate businesses, from restaurants to real estate. But Bumpy was different from the typical gangster. He saw himself as more than a criminal. He was a protector, a power broker, and, above all, a champion of his community. Born in South Carolina and raised in the harsh streets of Harlem, Bumpy had fought his way up from nothing. He had survived prison, gang wars, and betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. But through it all, he maintained a strict personal code. He never sold drugs in black neighborhoods. He never allowed violence against women or children. And he absolutely would not tolerate disrespect toward the artists and musicians who gave Harlem its soul. Bumpy loved jazz the way some men loved religion. It was his sanctuary, his pride, his connection to something beautiful in a world that could be brutally ugly. He attended performances whenever he could, sitting in the back of smoky clubs, his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. He knew all the greats personally, from Duke Ellington to Count Basie, and he made sure they could perform in Harlem without interference or trouble. But Billie Holiday held a special place in his heart. They had met years earlier when Billie was still establishing herself. Bumpy had been at one of her early Harlem performances, and afterward, he had introduced himself. What started as mutual respect had grown into genuine friendship. Bumpy saw in Billie a kindred spirit, someone who had survived impossible circumstances and transformed pain into something transcendent. He protected her fiercely. When club owners tried to shortchange her, Bumpy made sure she got every penny. When men got too aggressive with her after shows, they mysteriously found themselves unable to walk for a few weeks. Billie never asked for his help, but Bumpy gave it anyway. To him, she was family, and Bumpy Johnson protected his family with absolute ruthlessness. What most people didn't understand about Bumpy was the extent of his influence. Yes, he controlled Harlem's underworld, but his reach extended far beyond the neighborhood's borders. He had silent partnerships and businesses throughout Manhattan. He knew everyone's secrets, everyone's debts, everyone's vulnerabilities. Politicians, judges, business owners, they all owed Bumpy favors or money, or both. He had built a network so intricate and so powerful that he could make things happen with nothing more than a few phone calls. People underestimated him because he was black, because he came from the streets, because they couldn't imagine someone like him wielding real power in their world. Vincent Rossi was about to learn just how wrong that assumption could be. And the lesson would cost him everything. The phone rang in Bumpy Johnson's Harlem townhouse at exactly 8:15 in the evening. He was sitting in his study, a glass of bourbon in hand, reviewing the week's receipts from his various enterprises. When he picked up the receiver, the voice on the other end was breathless with anger. "Bumpy, it's Marcus. You need to know what just happened to Lady Day." Marcus Williams was one of Bumpy's most trusted associates, a man who handled the legitimate side of their business operations. He had been at the Ebony Room on other business when he witnessed Billie's humiliation. As Marcus recounted what Vincent Rossi had said and done, Bumpy's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. His face remained impassive, but anyone who knew him would have recognized the dangerous stillness that came over him. It was the calm before a very destructive storm. "Where is she now?" Bumpy asked, his voice quiet and controlled. "Still outside. The club with her musicians. I don't think she knows what to do." The contract was solid, Bumpy. This Rossi character just decided he didn't want a Negro performer, regardless of what was agreed. Bumpy took a slow sip of his bourbon, his mind already working through the angles. "Tell me about this club. Who owns it? Who holds the paper?" Marcus had anticipated the question. Officially, Rossi owns it outright, but I know for a fact he's overextended. He took out loans to renovate the place 6 months ago. Big loans. And I know who holds some of that debt. A thin smile crossed Bumpy's face. "Do you now?" "Atlantic Finance Company holds the biggest note. And unless I'm mistaken, didn't we help them with that situation last year? The one with the union dispute at their office building? We did?" "Bumpy. Confirmed, they owe us considerably." "What else?" "Rossi also has smaller debts to at least 3 other lending institutions. And his liquor license comes up for renewal next month. He's been cutting corners on his taxes too, from what I hear." The man's vulnerable, Bumpy. Very vulnerable. Bumpy stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out over the Harlem streets he controlled. In his world, power wasn't just about muscle and intimidation. It was about information, leverage, and knowing exactly which pressure points to squeeze. "Make the calls," Bumpy said. "I want that club. And I want it tonight." Before Billie's first song would have ended, if that. Fool had let her perform. "Bumpy, that's less than an hour. Then you'd better work fast," Bumpy interrupted. "Call Atlantic Finance first. Tell them I'm calling in the favor. All of it." Marcus didn't hesitate. Consider it done. The machine that was Bumpy Johnson's empire shifted into high gear with terrifying efficiency. Marcus's first call went to the president of Atlantic Finance Company, a man named Harold Greenspan, who answered his home phone with obvious irritation. That irritation vanished the moment Marcus identified himself and invoked Bumpy's name. "Harold, remember last year when your workers were about to strike? When it looked like your entire operation might shut down and cost you everything?" Marcus kept his voice pleasant, almost friendly. "Remember who made that problem disappear?" There was a long silence on the other end. "I remember," Greenspan finally said. "Good, because Mr. Johnson needs you to call in alone. The Ebony Room on East 52nd Street. Vincent Rossi is the borrower. I need you to demand immediate full payment or transfer the deed to a company I'm about to give you the name of." Marcus. "That's not how we herald." Acosta's voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't a request. Make the call, now, or I can guarantee your next labor dispute won't end as favorably." 5 minutes later, Vincent Rossi's phone rang behind the bar of the Ebony Room. Greenspan delivered the message personally. "Pay the full balance of $73,000 immediately, or the bank would foreclose and transfer ownership to settle the debt." Rossi had 1 hour to decide. Rossi laughed into the phone, thinking it was some kind of joke. "You can't do this. I have years left on that loan." "Read the fine print, Mr. Rossi. We have the right to call the loan due for any reason. You have 1 hour." While Rossi sputtered and threatened legal action, Marcus was already making his second call, then his third, then his fourth. Each one was to someone who owed Bumpy a favor, or feared him, or both. And each call tightened the noose around Vincent. Rossi's financial throat, the owner of Rossi's secondary mortgage, suddenly decided he wanted his money too. The supplier who provided the club's liquor called to say their credit had been suspended and payment was due immediately. The building inspector who had overlooked certain violations received an anonymous tip that the Ebony Room was operating. UNSAFELY. Within 30 minutes, Vincent Rossi had gone from smug club owner to a man drowning in debt and legal threats. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Each call brought fresh disaster. And he had no idea why everything was happening at once. Meanwhile, across town, lawyers were drawing up transfer documents at record speed. A shell corporation controlled by Bumpy Johnson was being positioned to acquire the Ebony Room's assets for pennies on the dollar. The building, the liquor license, the fixtures. The name, all of it was about to change hands. Bumpy made one final call himself, this one to a judge who owed him multiple favors. I need these documents filed and approved. Tonight, can you make that happen? The judge didn't even hesitate. Consider it done, Bumpy. Well, the clock was ticking. And Vincent Rossi's time as owner of the Ebony Room was almost up. Billie Holiday was standing on the corner with her musicians, trying to decide what to do next when a sleek black Cadillac pulled up to the curb. A well-dressed man stepped out. Someone she vaguely recognized from the Harlem social scene. "Miss Holiday," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "My name is Marcus Williams. I work with a mutual friend of ours. Mr. Johnson asked me to inform you that there's been a change. In management at the Ebony Room, the club is under new ownership as of 5 minutes ago. And your performance is very much desired." Billie stared at him, confused. "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" Marcus smiled. "Mr. Johnson has purchased the establishment. He wanted me to personally escort you and your musicians back inside. Your dressing room is ready, and the stage is waiting for you." Inside the Ebony Room, Vincent Rossi was having the worst hour of his life. He had just received the final call, this one from his lawyer, explaining in brutal detail that he had lost everything. The building, the business, even the furniture, it had all been legally transferred to a corporation he'd never heard of. The speed of it was impossible, yet the documents were all legitimate. Filed and approved by a judge. Rossi was still reeling, trying to process the destruction of his livelihood. When Marcus walked through the front door with Billie Holiday and her musicians behind him, the crowd that had witnessed Billie's earlier humiliation now watched in stunned silence as she glided past the exact spot where Rossi had rejected her. She didn't even glance in his direction. She simply walked toward the dressing rooms as if she owned the place. Marcus, however, walked directly to Vincent Rossi. "Mr. Rossi," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I have a message from the new owner. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Don't bother collecting your personal items tonight. They'll be mailed to you." Rossi's face went from red to purple. "You can't do this. This is my club. I built this place." "It was your club," Marcus corrected. Past tense. "Now it belongs to someone who understands the value of Miss Holiday's talent. You have 5 minutes to leave before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." 2 security guards appeared as if summoned, flanking Vincent Rossi on either side. These weren't the same men who had worked for him earlier that evening. These were Bumpy's people, brought in specifically to handle this moment. Rossi looked around desperately, hoping for support from the staff or the patrons, but the waiters avoided his eyes. The bartender suddenly became very interested in polishing glasses. Even the customers who had nodded in agreement when he turned Billie away now seemed fascinated by their drinks. No one was going to help him. He had no power here anymore. "This isn't over," Rossi hissed at Marcus. "I'll sue. I'll fight this. You can't just steal a man's business." Marcus leaned in close, his voice dropping so only Rossi could hear. Everything that happened tonight was completely legal. Every document filed properly. Every debt called in legitimately. You're the one who decided to humiliate Billie Holiday in public. You're the one who thought you were untouchable. Mr. Johnson simply taught you otherwise. The words hit Rossi like a physical blow. Bumpy Johnson did this. His voice cracked. With sudden fear, everyone in New York knew that name, knew what it meant. You disrespected someone he considers family. Marcus said simply, "What did you think would happen?" As the security guards began escorting Rossi toward the exit, Billie emerged from the dressing room. She had changed into a stunning performance gown, the gardenia still perfect in her hair. She looked every bit the star she was, radiant and untouchable. She walked onto the stage as the house band struck the opening chords of her first number. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. This was the moment they had all paid to see, though none of them had imagined it would happen. Under these circumstances, Billie approached the microphone, her eyes sweeping across the audience. Then she began to sing. Her voice filled the room, rich and textured with all the pain and beauty she carried inside her. The song was a slow, mournful ballad about love and loss, but everyone listening understood it meant something more tonight. It was a statement of survival, of dignity maintained in the face of hatred. Vincent Rossi heard the opening notes as the security guards pushed him through the front door onto the street. The last sound he heard from his former club was Billie Holiday's voice, strong and clear and absolutely triumphant. By the time she reached the end of the first verse, Rossi was standing on the sidewalk, unemployed and disgraced, watching his entire world disappear. The song hadn't even finished. Just as Bumpy had promised, Billie's performance that night became legendary. Whispered about in jazz circles for years afterward, she poured everything into it, every hurt, every injustice, every moment of strength she had ever needed to summon. The audience sat transfixed. Many of them the same people who had watched her turned away less than 2 hours earlier. Some of them looked ashamed now, unable to meet her eyes. Others were simply lost in the music, understanding for perhaps the first time the depth of artistry standing before them. She sang for 90 minutes without a break, moving from heartbreak ballads to blues numbers that made the room vibrate with feeling. Her musicians played like men inspired, following her lead through every subtle shift and improvisation. Between songs, the room erupted in applause that felt different from ordinary appreciation. It was applause edged with guilt, with awe, with the uncomfortable recognition of what had almost been lost to bigotry. Bumpy Johnson himself arrived during the third song, slipping into a booth in the back corner. He ordered bourbon and watched Billie with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't done this for recognition or thanks, because no one disrespected his people without consequences. When Billie's eyes found him during a quiet moment, she gave the slightest nod. No words were needed. She understood exactly what he had done and why. As the night wore on, word spread throughout Manhattan's entertainment world. The story raced from club to club, growing slightly more elaborate with each telling, but the core remained the same. Bumpy Johnson had bought an entire nightclub just to fire the owner who insulted Billie Holiday. The message was received loud and clear. Harlem's king protected his own, and he had resources that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. You could discriminate, you could be a bigot, but if you crossed the wrong person, you might wake up to find your entire life had been purchased out from under you. By the time Billie took her final bow, the Ebony Room had been transformed from a scene of humiliation into a monument to justice. The consequences of that night rippled outward, like waves from a stone thrown into still water. Within a week, every club owner in Manhattan had heard the story. Many of them had their own discriminatory policies, their own unwritten rules about who could perform and who couldn't. But now they had to weigh those prejudices against the risk that one of their rejected. Performers might have powerful friends. Several clubs quietly changed their booking policies. It wasn't a moral awakening, it was pure self-preservation. If Bumpy Johnson could buy the Ebony Room in under an hour, who else might have that kind of power and reach? Vincent Rossi's fate became a cautionary tale. He tried to find work at other establishments, but his reputation preceded him. No one wanted to hire the man who had provoked Bumpy Johnson's wrath. He eventually left New York entirely, broken and bitter. A living example of how quickly fortune could reverse. Bumpy kept the Ebony Room for 3 months, running it as one of the first truly integrated high-end clubs in Manhattan. He hired a new manager, instituted a policy of booking the best talent regardless of race, and made sure the club became known as a place where artistry mattered more than skin color. Then, once the point had been made and the message had spread, he sold it for twice what he had paid. The new owners maintained his policies, knowing full well that Bumpy would be watching. Billie Holiday returned to perform at the renamed club several times over the following years. Each time, she was treated like royalty, given the best dressing, room, paid top dollar, and shown the respect she had always deserved. Her friendship with Bumpy deepened. They would meet for dinner in Harlem, sharing stories and laughter to people who understood what it meant to fight for dignity in a world determined to deny it. He never asked for thanks, and she never offered it in words. The bond between them was stronger than gratitude, it was family. This story endures because it represents something deeper than one act of revenge or justice. It shows what was possible when power was wielded not just for personal gain, but for protection and dignity. Bumpy Johnson was far from a saint. His empire was built on illegal enterprises, and his methods were often brutal. But in a society that systematically denied Black Americans the tools of legitimate power, he created his own power structure and used it to defend his community. Billie Holiday's humiliation that night was not unique. Countless Black performers faced similar treatment in the North and South before and after this incident. Most of them had no Bumpy Johnson to call. Most of them had to swallow the insult and move on. But this one time, in this one moment, justice was swift and total. And that made all the difference.